All right, Lindsay, what's in your lens today?
Let's talk about it. So when it comes to fighting America's drug problem, the Trump administration seems to have traded courtrooms for combat zones. The U.S. military has been carrying out airstrikes and sea strikes on alleged drug smuggling boats in the Caribbean and off the coast of Venezuela. Officials say these operations are meant to stop narco-terrorists before they reach our shores. But here's the problem. We don't actually know who's being killed or what evidence proved they were drug traffickers in the first place. According to the administration, at least 43 people have been killed since this campaign began. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says that the military has conducted its 10th strike so far, and there's talk of land strikes coming up next. Senator Lindsey Graham even told CBS News that he thinks the president has decided, quote, it's time to go for Maduro, or for Maduro to go, talking about the Venezuelan leader and calling land strikes, quote, a real possibility. Graham also doubled down, saying the military will, quote, kill the people that want to poison America. But let's just pause, because while Graham sounds ready to invade and escalate, other lawmakers, even Republicans, are sounding the alarm. Senator Rand Paul, a longtime defender of the Constitution, went on Fox News Sunday and said he's never been invited to any briefing or anything about these attacks.
But a briefing's not enough to overcome the Constitution. The Constitution says that when you go to war, Congress has to vote on it. And during a war, then, there's a lower rules for engagement. People do sometimes get killed without due process. But the drug war or the crime war has typically been something we do through law enforcement. And so far, they have alleged that these people are drug dealers. No one said their name. No one said what evidence. No one said whether they're armed. And we've had no evidence presented. So at this point, I would call them extrajudicial killings.
And Paul didn't stop there.
This is akin to what China does, to Iran does with drug dealers. They summarily execute people without presenting evidence to the public. So it's wrong.
And that's really the point. America is built on checks and balances. We're supposed to be a country that demands proof before punishment, not one that bombs suspects at sea without due process. Yet the White House is openly suggesting it doesn't need Congress. Trump even told reporters, quote, we'll probably go back to Congress and explain exactly what we're doing, but we don't have to do that. So let me get this straight. If 43 people were killed in a law enforcement operation with no evidence shown, no transparency, and no vote from Congress, what exactly do we call that? The war on drugs or the war without rules? Because when a government decides it can kill whoever it labels a criminal without a trial, without proof, and without oversight, that's not a show of strength. That's a red flag. At the very least, Americans deserve answers. Who was killed? Why? Under what legal authority? Until we know that, calling these extrajudicial killings isn't even radical. It's just reality.
Well, we agree. Great little monologue there. This is an issue.
Wow, compliments all around. Good. I just think.
Yeah, Rand Paul is, my ideological, he's my guy, so I shouldn't be surprising. I agree with him. I think we got to be very careful here that just because they're in open water doesn't mean you can blow people away for what is a counter narcotics operation, which is kind of a criminal issue, right. not a warfare issue.
Well, he's calling it counterterrorism in order to get around, specifically, I think.
Right, but we haven't authorized, you could take a vote in Congress and you could authorize, Congress could vote to say we are at war with Venezuelan narco-terrorists, and then maybe they could take this action. But the reason to do that is so then you're on the record supporting or being for it or against it, right. And the American people can hold their elected representatives accountable. That's the way this goes. If you just say, oh, well, they count as terrorists, so now they can be blown away under the previous mandate for the U.S. government to counter terrorism wherever it exists, well, I think that's a slippery slope to just describing everything as terrorism. We're going to have say terrorists are on our streets here in America, we can blow them up. And yeah, what happens when you get it wrong? Rand Paul has pointed out that when we stop boats and search them, we get it wrong about a quarter of the time.
Right.
Where a quarter of these people, not terrorists, they're just being blown up. Who are they?
And then also the people that have survived these attacks are like in the shape where they can't even speak. So like the intel that you would gain, and not saying, certainly don't want to protect anybody bringing drugs into our country. I know it's become this epidemic where people are really dying and it's a very serious issue. But I do think that there's a strategy that could provide more information to try to get the solution more final rather than just blowing people up. It almost feels like a video game in the way that we're behaving. And also as somebody who...
The fentanyl is not entering our country this way, is my understanding.
So they're talking about other drugs.
Well, they're not. These aren't headed to our shores. These are headed to other places in the Caribbean.
And then they find their way to the U.S. Yeah. So I think that when you blow up ships, especially as we move towards land, because the president has strongly signaled that and said, "Oh, I might ask Congress." He very loosely mentioned that, which I think is appropriate because blowing up the ships to me was already an act of war. Doing anything on land is surely an act of war. And I think as somebody who has campaigned on the anti-war president and somebody who is very much anti a lot of the wars that we've had historically, then you shouldn't start any new wars. And to expect that there won't be any, even if it's minuscule compared to what the U.S. can do, any retaliation, we are now involving our U.S. troops in something new, a new battle that maybe could have been handled a little bit differently by just calling it what it is, counter-narcotics mission and not counterterrorism. I think once we enter that bucket, it's like everybody can do whatever you want. And I think you can probably expound on this more than I can, but much of MAGA and the base seems like they are also anti-war and strayed away from the traditional conservative party that maybe people used to describe as war hawks. And they're just like, we should have been out of Afghanistan. We should have been out of Iraq before we were in both instances. And so why would we start anything new?
Right. I mean, I think if I am to defend this is my view, but let's take off my here's what Robbie thinks hat and put on my defend MAGA, defend what Trump's doing hat, I would say that, Afghanistan and Iraq, certainly, that's the case, but those are different countries. Those are halfway across the world. This is in our own hemisphere. This is the Americas. We are the big dog in the Americas. We have a more vital national security interest, not in changing some regime in Iraq and Afghanistan, but in regimes in our own backyards. Venezuela's regime is authoritarian, socialist, and hostile, and oppresses its people and is despicable, and the people want to change. The people are advocating for change, and if we can play some small role in fostering a democratic governance there, that would be more called for. Different countries are different. It's not the same situation as Afghanistan. It's not the same situation as Libya. It's not the same situation as Syria. I think that's what the regime would say.
And they say insanity is doing the same thing over and expecting a different result, right?
It's not the exact same thing.
But it's similar. It's that we try to come into countries that are not our own, change the leadership, knock it down, and then we destabilize the country we leave with it equally, if not more destabilized than it was prior to us arriving. We've had multiple examples of that historically. And so to me, I'm just trying to understand what the end game is here. Right. If the end game is really counteracting the drugs or just killing Maduro, we need to figure out and be transparent about that to see if America wants to be involved with President Trump's crusade against getting that leader out of position versus if President Trump wants to stop these drugs from coming in or finding their way through the Caribbean to us, then let's figure that out and go through Congress. Let's not just attack this country because you might not like the way their policies are.
Through Congress. But
right.
We don't like their policies and their own people don't like their policies. Maduro is a despot and an enemy of democracy and an enemy of the West and an enemy of his own people.
But a lot of time an uprising, a new leader comes in that's equally as bad.
Right.
We've seen that happen
experience in the Middle East.
Exactly. And so it's kind of like, I know it's a totally different territory, but what changes the circumstance? Like people there might easily elect.
They're more different than Venezuela. They're more different. They have there was no history of democracy in that country. It's culturally Islamic. It's different. Here, these are people who are they're fellow Americans. They're part of America. America is a two continents is culturally distinct. That would be the reason to do. Again, I'm not selling it well because I'm not in favor of it. I think Congress
trying to help us understand.
Process this, and if they are so moved to do, they would have to declare war. I don't think Trump should, of his own volition, do this.
This is a good conversation for the comment section.
Yeah.
Tell us why.
We'll see what they have to say. Next up, the sports world is being rocked by a major gambling scandal in the NBA that's led to multiple arrests. Coming up, why lawmakers say it's time for tighter regulations on sports betting.